Nothing in the kingdom of God is accidental. So I believe if you are currently seeing this video, that it could change your life forever. And like all the other videos, I'm not saying that as a manipulation tactic. I'm saying this to come alongside with you. I'm not preaching at you. I'm right beside you. Act as if that you are sitting on this couch right here with me. Because I know how difficult it can be to be obedient to God and really step out and do what He has called you to do. I want to give you a little story and tell you a little bit about my life before I tell you what this episode is about. So pretty much all my life, I knew God has called me to do videos like this, be on social media, do all those things. But for the longest time, I didn't have the belief that I should have had in one, God, but then secondly, myself to step out and do. And not until I want to say about 7 months ago, I really locked in and started posting on social media. It went amazing. I'd say in about 7 months, 7 or 8 months, through God empowering me and His Spirit being on me, I reached about 20 million people, and that's beautiful and all. I was still out of line and out of step what specifically God told me to do, and this is where you come in. I was doing a half effort of obedience, and what I realized is half step of obedience is really still disobedience. And I wanted to change that, and I want this to be my starting point, and hopefully it can be yours as well. A lot of the times we are praying for God to change our life. We're praying for Him to move. We're praying for Him to do all this stuff, but we still don't actually step up and do the thing that we know we're called to because of the lack of belief. And your belief in a thing will determine how much you actually go forward and step forward and do the thing. And I know for myself, this podcast actually scares me a bit. And I said this in my first episode. I said this at this podcast is scary to me because it makes me go to a higher level in myself as far as preparation, as far as really reading the word of God and really wanting to convey it in a way that is palatable and then also grows people and helps people to the next level. And so it was really my own cowardice, honestly, to not step forward and really do this the way in which God told me to do it. And someone recently was actually, I was telling them all the things that, I felt God wanted me to do with this podcast and or in general in life in these next seasons. And he's like, "Man, you ever read the story of Gideon?" And I said, "No." I would say, "Yes, actually, I've read that before, but it's been a little while, so a couple of the things are missing." And mind you, a couple months before that, one of my good friends, Justin P, he had a dream. He was like, "Man, you know what? I really feel like God is telling you, bro, like, you need to stop strategizing." And he gave me a couple things after that, and I was like, "Yeah, cool, man, sure, I believe you." Then, one of my pastors, he we were, after, the Bible study that we do here in Atlanta, and he came up to me, and he was like, "Man, I I'm I really feel like the Lord is telling you to be a son." And I was like, "Okay." So I heard that from one friend, heard another from my pastor, and then I kept seeing this word specifically, sacrifice, 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 sacrifice. And so now I'm stuck in between these 2 words, what God is telling me to do. He's telling me to be a son, sonship, be with the Father, be like a son, just like Jesus, pray to the Father, be with Him, and just enjoy and just be in His presence on one side. And then on the other side, I'm getting told to sacrifice. And I'm like, "Man, I don't know what the heck that means." Like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this information. It's not until I talked to another one of my good friends, and we were talking again after Bible study one week, and she was like, "Yeah, we haven't talked in a while. Like, what's going on?" I heard what she got going on. And then I told her what God has been doing through my life. And I was like, "Yeah, I feel like God has just been saying, be a son, sonship, that idea of truly being with the Father. And then secondly, sacrifice." And I'm like, "Man, I don't know what the heck this means, but this is what God has been showing me." And she's like, "Amir, this is so clear." And I'm like, 12 is clear. Let me know what you have to say. And she told me, she looked me in my face and said, "Obviously, God is saying for you to be a son and then sacrifice your strategy, sacrifice all the things in which you feel like you need to do." And I'm like, "Whoa, okay." That hit me like a ton of bricks because for me, the podcast was so difficult for me to do this and put these videos out because I was leaning on my own effort, my own will, my own strategy. And remind you that I said someone else told me to read the story of Gideon. So this is, I mean, this is happening in about a 2 month span. All these stories told me to read the story of Gideon. So I started read the story of Gideon, and reluctantly so, to be honest. I didn't necessarily want to, but I was like, hey, I want to be obedient when God tells me to do something. I read the story of Gideon, and if you don't know, I'm going to give you a quick breakdown, not word for word like I usually do in the Bible. Don't mind, don't worry, the Bible's right here, but we're just going to go speak from the heart today. And I was reading the story of Gideon. Lo and behold, Gideon really in the beginning of the story is most people would say somewhat a coward, in many ways. And so he was actually the spirit of the Lord came to him, an angel came to him and told him that he was a mighty man of valor. And to give you a little context on the story of Gideon, who he was ruled by a different kingdom, and he was hiding, doing his work, weed hitting the wheat in a wine press. And if you know anything about those times, the if you're doing the wheat, you have to be done in an open space. But since they were controlled so much in an area by a different territory, he had to do it in a wine press, and a wine press is inside and it's a small area. Keep that in mind. So he had to do that. And but during that time, the spirit of the Lord had came to him and said, Gideon, you are a mighty man of valor, and the Lord has anointed you to do this great work. And I was like, wow, that's interesting as I'm reading that story, because I felt as though the Lord kind of had did a similar thing to me about 5 months ago, telling me to start this podcast, as I was doing other things and getting out of a season of doing sales. And God had spoke to me when I went to a church through a prophet, and a prophet is just someone who kind of hears from God and tells you different things. A lot of it is confirmation. And he was telling me, you are, he actually asked me in front of the whole church, do you have a podcast? And I was like, wow, that's crazy because I just started one a couple days ago. Long and behold, that's 3 months ago. If you want to hear that full story, you can watch the first episode. I'm reading through Gideon. I see that the Lord's telling him that he needs to that he's called a mighty man of valor and he's called to do this specific work. Gideon, instead of believing what the Spirit of the Lord said first, he first challenges God and says, "If it's really you, if you're really telling me to do this," he asks him to essentially put water on a fleece, and if in the morning he challenges God. He asks two ways he challenges God. God, because God is so faithful, and I want you to follow. This is where the story starts to get good. Because God is so faithful, and God knew what he had put inside of Gideon, he still answered the call of that of him asking God, "Hey, God, you've called me to something, but I need to know if it's you." And that sounds like a lot like us. God, I know you called me to this, but you really need to show me if it's really you. Lo and behold, God does the two things that Gideon asks of him to do. And Gideon ends up stepping forward, and he does this specifically. God told him to do this. So in his territory, they were worshiping another god, and God told Gideon to tear down the altar of Baal, the god that his father was worshiping and his city was worshiping. He ended up tearing it down, but again, listen to this. He didn't tear it down in broad daylight. He did it in the darkness. And I think this is the two key things about that. God, one, the first time God told him to do something, didn't believe God, asked God to show up, asked God to do two different things to him, challenging the Lord after he told him what he was already supposed to do. Then the second one is God tells him to tear down, and see, look, listen how gracious and how wonderful our God is. God asks him to tear down an altar from another God, and he didn't do it in broad daylight, and he did it at night, and God still honored that. And after he's done that, the people wanted to kill him. Interesting. Interesting how that idea of obedience leads to him almost dying. But his father steps up and says, "Hey, we're not going to kill his son. This is the God that we're serving, the God of Israel, the God of Jacob. We are going to follow this God." So he tears down that altar, builds up an altar for God. Then the Spirit of the Lord comes over Gideon again to tell him to go ahead now and gather people, gather tribes in order to go take over another village that I want you to take over. Now I want to pause here because this is where again the story starts to get good for you and I. Even though that Gideon was told to do something, even though that you were told to do something by God. And you may feel like you're behind, and you may feel like you did it wrong. You may feel like you did it incorrectly, but believe this video is a sign for you to show you that this is the sign for you to double down of what God has shown you to do. You may have not done it right in the past. You may have not done it the exact way. You may have even questioned God if you were the one to do it, but I'm here to tell you that you are. I'm here to tell myself that I am, because God has called you. If He's called you, He has equipped you. And the only way you find out that equipping, the only way you find out that you can make it to the end is by truly stepping forward in faith. And stepping forward in faith doesn't mean you're gonna not gonna be scared, right? That's where courage steps in. Courage is the thing that you do past what you're feeling. So it's okay to feel afraid. It's not okay to do the thing that He has called you to do. I hope we're all aligned there. And so now Gideon is in a place to where God anoints him again to go ahead and call the nation, call the different people around him to go take over another territory. These people end up coming around him because he had this influence that God has given him to attract the people. He ends up attracting these people, going forward and going to the place. Now the interesting part about it, when God told him to go gather these people, He didn't tell him how many people to grab. So like we always do, if God tells us to do something, instead of really waiting to hear what the Spirit of the Lord is going to tell us to do, we automatically go to the max and think we got to do all of this stuff and go far above and beyond for what He's called us to do, rather than just taking the first step. So he goes, I guess his first step was to strategize, which a lot of us do incorrectly, and that leads us into God telling us to dial back. He gets 32,000 people. And God told him He cuts his army in more than half. I think it was ended up being 10,000 people, and then He cuts the army again to 300 people. And I found that very interesting, because a lot of the times, anytime we have something to do, when God has called us to do something, we think we need to put all of our human effort to do it because we think we know better than God. I know I've been in that place. Sometimes I think I know what's best for my life or is best for the thing that He's called me to. And I go ahead and I do it. I mess up and I'm like, okay, God, well, how do you actually want me to do it? And sometimes God gives you a specific, and sometimes He just tells you to do the last thing that He told you to do, and that's taking that small step of faith. It's taking that small action in order to get even closer to where He wants you to be. So Gideon goes ahead and cuts down his army from 30,000 men to 300 people. And mind you, they're going to go take over another territory with thousands, tens of thousands of people. So your first question may be, okay, how in the world is Gideon going to be able to accomplish this? Even though God told him, hey, you're a mighty man of valor, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this. Of course, and this story doesn't record this, but I would have to assume that Gideon was frightened, was afraid, was not necessarily, uh he didn't feel as though what God told him to do was going to actually happen. He didn't think he could probably take over the army after cutting down his own army by tens of thousands. So he ends up cutting it down to 300 people. Then the God told him to do two specific things. He told him to blow a horn and then light a lantern. And the interesting about this happened at nighttime. This happened at nighttime to confuse the army. Now the army is completely confused, thrown left and right, going absolutely ballistic because of the way that God told Gideon to win, and not by force, not by might, but by the Spirit of God, as it says in the word as well. I think that's in Zechariah. And so Gideon now, he blows this horn, his whole army blows a horn, lights these lanterns up ablaze, wakes up the army, and listen to this. They didn't have to lift a finger in order to kill the army. The strategy from God confused the enemy so much, the enemy thought that their own people were the people they were supposed to be fighting. So they wake up in confusion and then they kill each other, inevitably leading to Gideon winning the battle. Now, how can we take that principle and this idea in our own life? How can we use this? God has called everyone to something specific. First, one is to love Him. Secondly, to love your neighbor. But the presupposition of that is loving yourself and loving the Lord, loving God first, then yourself. Then the presupposition that you'll love your neighbor. And so now that we know that, we have that understanding that God has empowered each and every one of us to do something very specific in the world. And we see what he did with Gideon and empowered Gideon to step forward without some strategy, without some crazy humanistic strategy. Because our thought is, hey, if we're going to go take over a camp, God, if you called me to be a writer, if you called me to be a singer, if you called me to do this, if you called me to be a mom, a dad, if you called him to be a husband, or in anything he has called you to do, we automatically think we have to do above and beyond God in order to get that thing rather than if God called you to something, your step is to step forward in faith in his and God's step is to finish and do the final work of making everything happen. I was listening to this video and I thought it was powerful talking about the idea of sight that, we can't make ourselves see. We can look at something, but we can't make ourselves see. God is the one that does that. God's power and his hand on your life allows you to see. He allows you to do all this stuff by his power and his covering on you. And so when we get into a place where we know we have to be obedient and we know we have to do the things, instead of looking at our own hands, we close our hands, we pray, and we look to the Lord, and we step forward, and we don't worry about the outcome. We worry about God doing the rest. All we have to do is the input. We do the things that God has called us to, and we leave the outcome to the Lord. Unless he comes and tells you to switch your strategy like he did Gideon. But our main goal isn't to be the one to make it happen. Our main goal is to do the things that he told us to do. And that takes a bit of faith. That takes, like it says, a faith of mustard seed can move a mountain, but it takes a bit of faith for us to really trust and believe God. And it almost allows you to sit there and think, do I actually believe God? Do I actually believe who he's called me to? Do I actually believe the identity that he has put upon me? Do I actually believe in him enough to just take the first step and to keep going until? And that's the scary part because it's until. Prayfully, it's awesome for Gideon that it happened to him just like that. And honestly, there's some blessings in my life that happen just like that. And other ones, I have to continue going because that's what God called me to. Look at Abraham and him having his first kid and having to sacrifice, almost having to sacrifice the kid on the altar, right? Not being able to have a kid with his wife for multiple years. I think it was like 70 years or something like that. And it allows us to lead to is like, can I wait long enough? Can we wait long enough for God to move and when we're being obedient to what he's called us to? Because again, it goes down to faith. Do you believe God or do you not believe him? And again, I'm not preaching to you. I'm not preaching at you. I'm literally saying this for myself. Because in this story and all of this stuff, and me telling you that I started this podcast and I did this and I did that, the thing that I missed in this whole thing was actually me not being that obedient in what God's called me to do. God has prophesied over this podcast and said that this was going to happen from it and that was going to happen from it. And honestly, in the moment, I believed it, but I didn't believe it in time. And honestly, the crazy part is, my story isn't like, Abraham's where it's, 100 years, 70 years, however long it was. This is 5 months. You know what I mean? 5 months of me being half obedient and then going to God praying, asking if he'll change my situation. And God's like, hey, your situation will change once you do the last thing that I told you to do. And again, that's for me. And I hope that's for you too. What is the last thing that he told you to do? You do it in obedience. And maybe it's not time for you to step out and do that thing. Maybe it's time, maybe you're in a season where you need to refine yourself, learn, do it. And if you don't feel like God has told you anything, do that. Refine yourself, learn, dive deeper into the Lord and seek him. Because more than anything that the God can give you, the best thing that he's already given us is access to his presence, to seeing his face, to communing with him, to being with him. And that's why the idea of sonship, that's why I believe the Lord was telling me sonship, because he doesn't just want me to do a whole bunch of things for him. He wants to be with me. The Lord wants to be with you above and beyond what he can do through you. God wants to be with you because that is where you get powered on the inside. That is where more than money, more than fame, whatever God has called you to, more than anything, your soul won't be at rest until it's able to rest in the presence of the Spirit of God. And so until you can find your hope and you can find a true resting place with the Lord there, then life will always be difficult, no matter if you've made it or not. And so let that be your first goal. And then your second goal is to looking for that purpose. And there's a very good quote that's for purpose that I seen one of these days. And it is this: purpose is a set of roles and responsibilities that the Lord has given you in this current season. And the end goal of those roles and responsibilities is all to be at the glory of God. And within this time period, you're learning how to serve others, you're learning how to grow yourself, and you're learning how to connect with Him. Simply, that's all purpose is: a set of roles and responsibilities in a current season that He has you in. And as long as you honor those roles and responsibilities and serve others and grow yourself and connect with God, that's what it's going to take in order to go to the next level. I don't know if this episode is gonna help anyone. It helped me to get this off my chest. It may have been all over the place, but I really just pray that whatever he has called you to, and all in all, that you trust him in it, and secondly, that you take that full step of obedience so your life can change. Because I truly believe that on the other side of your obedience is everything that you've ever prayed for. I love y'all. Go in peace.